Good evening. Oh, there's the camera. Okay. So I'm very happy to be with you all tonight. My name is Chris Chappell. I'm the Doshi Professor of Indic and Comparative Theology, as well as the founding director of the Master of Arts in Yoga Studies. And for those of you new to LMU, if you want to know anything, I'm like the senior grandfather here. And I've been here since 1985. And along the way, we've been really gifted with so many opportunities of welcoming and so many different intersections of disciplines as well as adventures. And I want, as we begin tonight, to thank first our program administrator and our administrative coordinator, our program administrator, Newborn rather, and Katie Davidson, and long involved with the program here. I want to acknowledge some LMU professors, Professor Swanson, who's in theological studies, Professor Abhishek, who is also in theological studies, and Professor Slatov, who gets special recognition because she's actually the coordinator of this. And she said, will you please introduce? And I said, okay. But she is teaching in theology and in the yoga studies program, and did her PhD in Sanskrit, translating the text at Lancaster University in England after completing degrees at Columbia. Now, you know Columbia.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, my son-in-law is teaching at Columbia right now. So the speaker tonight is part of a really interesting, robust group that would sort of stumble into St. Robert's. And was it 97 or 98?
97.
97, yeah. And one of his classmates is Linda Cardellini, who is quite the renowned actress. And others of them I've stayed in touch with. I've officiated weddings for people out of that group. And it was really just a remarkable, memorable group of people. And I remember when now Professor Ashton, then Geoff, sort of came around and said, I want to learn more about this stuff. And he wrote this magnificent, very long paper on the Bhagavad Gita. And he was a double major in Spanish and philosophy here at LMU, and took great interest in the work of Ortega y Gasset, who was really the premier Spanish existentialist philosopher of the 20th century. He wrote this remarkable paper that was working both angles of Spanish existentialism and Indian philosophy. And he studied Sanskrit here with John Casey when John Casey was part of our faculty, and who had studied at the University of Hawaii, and then went on to do studies in Indian religions at the University of Chicago, completed a master's degree there before then going to the University of Hawaii and doing a rather remarkable dissertation on Kashmir Shaivism and the work of the great philosopher Abhinavagupta. He proceeded to become assistant professor at University of Colorado in Colorado Springs, and very successful time there, and really wanted to come west. So he is now the chair of the philosophy department at the University of San Francisco. So he's currently putting together a volume based on papers that a group of scholars gave up at USF in the spring on Sankhya philosophy, and is currently writing a paper on Sankhya and AI. which I think will be sort of fascinating to think about. And tonight, we're discovering the Buddhist side of Professor Ashton. And not only has he many credentials and entanglements with the yoga communities, but has also for a long time been part of both the Thai Buddhist practice community. He actually was paid to study Thai while he was doing his doctoral degree. And my wife and I had some great adventures with Geoff while we were in Bangkok together some time back. And he has also extensive training and a little bit of status in the Zen tradition. So without further ramblings, I'd like to introduce Professor Ashton.
Okay, everybody hear me okay in the back? Yeah. And I'm assuming there's speakers straight into the Zoom crowd. All right, so thanks, Chris, for the introduction. Just incredible memory that he gets all of that and like really so accurate to all of those details. Some things that I myself forgot.
Dissertation, right?
Yeah, my dissertation. It's true, I did stumble into class back in fall '97. Luckily, there were a few seats in the back consistently that were open. And Chris was so, he would just kind of take a quick look at us and was like, he understands what's happening here. And actually, I think some of those people I stumbled into the classroom with may actually be on the Zoom party this evening. So, so we're going to start with, instead of an academic discussion or rather talk on my part, we're going to start with a practice, with a meditation. It'll be very brief. And this one is more from the traditional Buddhist meditative tradition. Of course, I'll do it while I'm standing here, but it's better done sitting. And you can just do it from exactly as you are sitting now. You don't need to assume any particular posture. So there'll be two parts to this. We'll go faster than we ordinarily would, but we won't rush it. So first, I'll ask you to close your eyes. And for the next couple minutes, all I ask you to do is just to feel the sensation of the air entering your nostrils. Of course, I'll ask you to breathe in through your nose and at your own pace, exhale through the nose. At your own pace, inhale through the nose and exhale through the nose. I simply want you just to observe the sensation of the air touching the skin at the entrance of the nostrils. What does it feel like as the air is coming into the nostrils. And then what does it feel like as the air is exiting the nostrils? If your mind starts to wander, you start to describe with words what it feels like. Just let that go and come back to the immediate sensation of the air coming in and then the air coming out. Still with your eyes closed, draw your awareness to top of the head. What is the feeling that you're having? The top of the head. Is it a tingling sensation? Is it warm? It's a little chilly. Just feel the sensation. Just notice the sensation there. Now follow that sensation down towards the ears and the temples. Come to the forehead. Does it feel like there? Now come down the face a little bit. Around your eyes, the nose. What's the sensation you're having in those areas? How about around your lips? The jaw? Follow that down to the neck. And come now to the left part of the neck and trace the sensation that you're having down towards your left shoulder. What does your shoulder feel like right now? Follow that sensation down the left arm, the back of the left arm, then towards the bicep. Follow that sensation down the left elbow, to the forearm, the wrist, the hand. One by one, starting with the thumb, index finger, each finger. What's the sensation that you're having there? Come up to the neck again. This time to the right side of the neck. Trace that sensation down the neck towards the right shoulder. Just notice the feeling of what it's like to be your right shoulder. Follow that to the back of the right arm. Then to the front of the right arm. elbow, down to the forearm, wrist, and from the hand, and move again from the thumb, one by one, each of the fingers. What's the sensation that you're experiencing there? Now come to the upper back. Notice the sensations that you're having in the shoulder blades, the mid back. Trace that down to the mid back, the lower back. And now wrap up a little bit to your chest. Down to the rib section, stomach, your belly button. Can you sense the skin of the belly button? What's that sensation feel like? Now come even further down into the pelvic region. Can you feel your sits bones in contact with the clothing that you're wearing? Sit bones sitting in the chair or the couch. Follow that to the left leg, the left thigh. Find a sensation that you're having in the left thigh. Trace that to the left knee, through the knee, down to the calf, the ankle, and then the left foot. And one by one, big toe, what does that feel like? Go through each of those left toes. Now come up to the right thigh, from the right hip, trace it through the thigh. What's the sensation you're having from the thigh to the right knee, down into the right calf, right ankle, into your foot, and then from the right big toe, next toe, your pinky eventually, the pinky toe. Now come back one last time. What's the sensation of the air entering the nostrils? And one last exhalation. What's the sensation of the air as it exits the nostrils? Okay, you can open your eyes now. So this these are two very early forms of Buddhist meditation. And, we don't know with certainty what exactly the Buddha was practicing. You can't say with exactness exactly what he was doing beneath the Bodhi tree when he experienced his enlightenment. But much research suggests that he was practicing these two methods here. First, called anapanasati, or mindfulness of breathing. And this is the exercise we started with. We did one last inhalation and exhalation. It's just simply paying attention to the sensation of the air coming into the nostrils and coming out. And it's quite possible he did that as kind of a grounding practice to get started with his meditations, because frankly, the one thing that's always available to us is breath and the sensation of that breath entering the nose and coming out. Even if one is, let's say, paralyzed in a wheelchair, even from the neck down, you still have that sensation of the breath entering the nose and coming out. And then he would move to vipassana, insight into the true nature of reality. This vipassana practice is very close to what we did with this body scan. And actually the body scan would continue. You would move from the toes and then work your way back up towards the crown of the head. And you would continue this practice. You might play with the speed once you develop some facility with this practice. And the goal is to continue the movement from one body part to the next, such that your attention does not get arrested at any given sensation. Whether it's a pleasurable sensation or an uncomfortable sensation, you're simply noticing that sensation, but you're not judging it at all. You're not getting caught up with this is a good sensation or it's a bad sensation. And you're certainly not getting caught up with thoughts that your mind might be constructing about these sensations. If you find yourself doing that, or rather you find your thoughts trailing off like this, then a really easy way to come back is come back to the sensation of the breath entering the nose and coming out. So in many ways, the breath grounds Buddhist meditation. And when you have that firm grounding, you're then allowed to experiment in more playful ways. You can speed up the body scan, you can slow it down and go incredibly slow, where perhaps one trip from the crown to the toes takes 45 minutes. And you're really dissecting every square inch of your body. Now, what's often reported through this is maybe after a few days of doing this or a few years of doing this, it's quite common for practitioners to say that they can't tell the difference between their mind and their body. Their body is simply an object of awareness, an object of sensation. And the mind is just simply the sensations in the body. And so they really don't exist apart from each other. Now, this practice, these meditative practices are ultimately concerned with this problem or this thing that the Buddha calls dukkha. And dukkha, as many of you know from your Sanskrit classes, you have an amazing Sanskrit teacher here with Zoe. Dukkha means suffering. And one of the things that these meditative practices remedy is that we often suffer, or at least we exacerbate our suffering, because we become fixated on the way things ought to be. We become fixated oftentimes on the way we think things ought to be. And oftentimes we can control that, oftentimes we can't. But either which way, it's often helpful to recognize simply the way things are. And that's what these practices are doing. The way things are is what my senses are telling me, from the crown of my head to the toes. Now, our mind interprets this data, this sense data in different ways. And there we start to get caught up with dreams of how things should be and should not be. But these practices ground us in the way things really are. And the Buddha saw this as a way, a basic way to help us not eliminate suffering, but to face suffering. You might have an uncomfortable sensation. You recognize that through these practices, but you also recognize I can't change this. I'm simply going to observe the sensation and not get caught up with my interpretation of it. Now, as Buddhism proliferates throughout the world, and in particular throughout Asia, it adapts to the local ways of life, the local values, local attitudes, and so on, as well as practices that are already at play in different regions. This is particularly the case in China, where you have this rich kind of variation of Buddhist practices, where Buddhism is mixing with Taoism and Confucianism, among other religious and philosophical traditions. And when it makes its way to Japan, somewhere around the 6th century CE, it again gives rise to different Buddhist traditions. And one of those, as many of you know, is called Zen. And even within Zen, there's a great variety of different Zen practices. I'm going to speak from a tradition that I'm familiar with, both in terms of theory and scholarship, but even more so in terms of my own personal practice for a number of years. And so I'll be speaking from kind of a blend of my own experience with this tradition, but also some of my research on this tradition. So when I use the term Zen, I'm strictly speaking from one lineage, but I'm not denying that there are many other forms of Zen. And one of the things that I'm going to focus on here is some of the nuanced differences between Zen meditative practice called Zazen. Zazen means seated meditation, and these early forms of Buddhist meditation, two of which we just very briefly practice. And the reason I want to do this is because it reveals just the really creative and rich ways that human beings within Buddhist traditions have redeployed concepts and practices that were available to them, but they have reused them in ways that presumably were suitable to the needs of those peoples and those communities. And among other things, maybe we'll appreciate the differences within Buddhism, such that we speak of many Buddhisms, many Buddhist philosophies, and many Buddhist practices. Now, before or to the end of doing that, we should also take note of some of our own biases and some of our own assumptions. Since as we're going about understanding terms and practices that have been translated from foreign languages and foreign cultures into our own, right, we don't want to make the assumption that, well, these terms mean exactly what we think they mean in my own language. So what I'm going to start with is actually the relationship between suffering and weight, and suffering and light. Suffering and weight, and suffering and light. This will come out throughout the presentation. And largely due to the influence of the Judeo-Christian tradition, whether you're Jewish or Christian or Muslim or not, you nonetheless inherit many of these values and ways of perceiving the world and understanding reality and your place in that reality. These assumptions have influenced how you think about things like suffering and happiness. So consider that we largely take for granted that it's good to step out of the darkness, right, and into the light. This harkens back to Christian teachings of the light of God. In terms of cognitive experience or knowledge, or what we call epistemology and philosophy, it's good to resolve obscurity, the obscurity of misunderstanding, and have things come to light, maybe the light of reason. And also in ethics or morality, people often speak of virtue. It's better to be virtuous than to be vicious. We seem to take that for granted. I'm not saying we shouldn't, I'm just pointing out that we do take that for granted. And then we associate that with things like, or phrases like, let's take the high road and not get caught up in one's base nature. Right? And oftentimes we associate this elevation or this levity to higher natures. We often associate that with some sort of divine nature. So there's a very interesting relationship between light and happiness, and light in the sense of lightweight, but also light as in illumination, and happiness. We assume that those things are naturally related. And then suffering and heaviness, suffering and that which brings us down, suffering and weight, and also suffering and darkness, the absence of light. For an illustration of this, let's consider a lesser known painting by Vincent van Gogh. As you can see here, it's titled Miners' Wives Carrying Sacks of Coal. Here, what you see, number of women hunched over, some nearly at 90 degrees. They're carrying heavy sacks, presumably sacks of coal. They're presumably working in the coal mines, or at least they're helping out. Maybe their husbands or whatnot working in the coal mines. It's a kind of a barren, cold, stark landscape. There's not a lot of light, not a lot of life, not a lot of vitality. You even might notice here, there's one woman, she seems to be looking back, perhaps expressing some sort of world weariness. These women are expressing in many ways through their physical posture, suffering and the heavy weight of suffering. To suffer is to bear a heavy burden, whether it's physical, mental, or emotional. And not just that, but to be forced to continue on without much agency, without much choice. Oops. Now, interestingly, the word suffering bears this out. The etymology of the word suffering bears this out. There's two parts to the word suffering, as you can see here. The first syllable, suf, comes from the Latin sub. Sub as in under or below or beneath, such as a submarine, something that goes beneath the marine layer. And sub also means secondary, like someone is subordinate to someone else. And the second word is fere, to carry, to bear, to endure, such as a ferry, a boat that transports people. The ferry is literally beneath the people it's transporting. It bears the weight of them as they move along from one spot to another. So to suffer means to undergo or to be forced to undergo something, to endure, to stand beneath or to be underneath something, a burden, and something that you can't get out from beneath. You're stuck beneath the weight of something. Now, this is very interesting. The word dukkha in Sanskrit is typically translated as suffering. That's the best word we have. But when you look at the word dukkha, at least the way it's typically translated, it doesn't make much sense how this means suffering. So the typical translation is having a bad accident. And everyone just kind of, Sanskrit just kind of throw their hands up and say, I don't get it. Maybe because you're riding in a cart and one of the axles is broken and so it's incredibly uncomfortable. And so I'm suffering this really long, uncomfortable ride on this broken cart. The word ka, one of its meanings is axle hole, and dus means bad or difficult. It's a feature of the Sanskrit language, as many of you know. Dus changes to dukh, hence you get dukkha. But there's another translation, another interpretation of this meaning. And that is, first, the dus remains bad or difficult. But then some scholars argue that the ka is actually originally meant sta. Now, here's why they think this. Look how similarly the Sanskrit is here. And the thinking is that originally suffering was dus sta, bad standing, but then due to certain changes in how the language was written, it changed to dukkha. And the meaning of suffering as bad standing was just simply forgotten. But if we take this seriously, dukkha or dusta would mean standing badly, an improper manner of standing, difficult to stand, or just bad posture. The Buddha would seem to echo this insight in a really well-known parable. The Buddha often teaches in the form of parables, much like Jesus, and other religious spiritual leaders. But one of these parables the Buddha gives to his disciples. I'll read it here. He says, "O monks, a man is on a journey. He comes to a vast stretch of water. On this side, the shore is dangerous, but on the other side, it is safe and without danger. There is no bridge for crossing over. It would be good, therefore, if I would gather grass, wood, branches, and leaves and make a raft, and with the help of the raft, cross over safely. Having crossed over and got to the other side, suppose that man would think, this raft was of great help to me. It would be good if I carry this raft on my head or on my back wherever I go." The Buddha then asks rhetorically, "What do you think, O monks? If he acted in this way, would that man be acting properly with regard to the raft?" And he answers his own question. "No, sir. It would be good if I beached this raft on the shore or moored it and left it afloat. In the same manner, O monks, I have taught a doctrine, a dharma or a dhamma, similar to a raft. It is for crossing over and not for carrying." Now, in case you haven't picked this up, the near side of the shore is the life of suffering. It's the life that we all want to escape or somehow resolve. And the far side of the shore is nirvana, where one lives a life in the absence of suffering, or in some way learning how to live with their suffering. And the parable, you could say, we could sum up the teaching of the parable in terms of how one should face suffering, and that is, let it go. Suffering is a heavy burden, and you simply need to learn how to let it go. Now, easier said than done, and for this reason, the Buddha develops a very sophisticated psychology of suffering, and also practices that are meant to remedy this, as we saw earlier. Much of this centers around the problem of craving. Craving, or tanha or trishna, craving is a primary cause of suffering because it binds our present feelings and our present thoughts to something from the past. Suppose that you're entrapped by anger towards someone who's done you wrong. What you might realize through Buddhist meditation is there's a difference between the sensation of a memory, an uncomfortable memory. This person did me wrong, and the memory of that is uncomfortable, it's painful. Interestingly, memories are sensations. They are mental sensations. Just as you might have an uncomfortable sensation of, let's say, a tingling in your foot that later turns painful. Now, just as when you would experience that sensation in your foot, you would want to just feel the sensation and not allow your mind to get caught up with some response or reaction to that. The Buddha will say similarly with mental sensations or memories, you simply want to feel the sensation and move on. Don't allow your awareness to become fixated by it. At the very moment you become fixated by it, you're then prone to craving. You crave to fix the situation. You crave to fix somebody, to retaliate, let's say, to the person who did you wrong. So what you're learning to do through these early forms of Buddhist meditation, among other things, you're learning to distinguish two moments, the sensation, and then what happens the subsequent moment is the craving with respect to the sensation. You want to eliminate the sensation, so you start devising a plan to eliminate that sensation. And the Buddha says, regardless of what you're going to do after this, simply feel the sensation and recognize the difference between those two moments. When you recognize the difference between those two moments, it of course doesn't eliminate the sensation, but it does give you the freedom to act however you choose in the next moment. And it also helps you to simply let go of the craving. So in brief, the craving is the weight that you are carrying with you. And that is the weight that you want to let go, not the sensation. You want to let go of the craving. Now you notice from this teaching, the Buddha is so serious about this that he says, even let go of my own teachings, because even my teachings can become a burden that you will then situate yourself beneath, and then that will bind you to continued suffering. Now, Zen Buddhism does not disagree with this general message. But there are some values here that are taken to be self-evident, which Zen does not agree with. One of those is this notion of a bodhisattva. I'm sure most of you are familiar with this notion of a bodhisattva. Zen would say, you shouldn't just leave the boat there. You should get back on the boat and travel back to the other shore, because the bodhisattva is committed to alleviating the suffering of all beings. So you're not going to accomplish that simply by letting the boat drop. Who knows, maybe you'll let the boat drop and it drifts away. A bodhisattva would be very concerned about that. Even if you had to carry the boat, the bodhisattva would do this, if it meant helping to alleviate the suffering of other beings. This relates to a second difference, and I've highlighted some of this here in bold. That the weight of things is not a necessary evil. To be a bodhisattva, one has to learn how to carry things with you, because things such as the raft or teachings of the Buddha or whatever it is that you learn through your profession, all of these things are valuable tools to help alleviate the suffering of other beings. So one has to learn not just to drop all things, but learn how to carry them without those things becoming afflictions. So in some ways, what Zen poses to traditional Buddhism and traditional Buddhist meditation is the question, is it necessarily the case that being beneath the weight of things is suffering? Must one exhibit suffering even when they're beneath the weight of things, and even when they're forced to endure a heavy burden against their will? Must one still suffer? Now, this woman would not agree. You'll notice she's walking quite straight. She's not bent over. You can barely see here, but same with this woman here. And if you could see her feet, you would see she's actually walking with a real sense of ease and grace. This woman is almost half the size of the burden that she's carrying. She's certainly beneath a heavy burden, but she shows no signs of suffering. Now, these women are just showing off now. The woman on the right is having lots of fun. This woman here, she's clearly a masochist. She enjoys her suffering. This woman here would seem to think it's okay to implicate her own child in her life suffering. But you can clearly see these women stand beneath the burden, but there are no signs of suffering here. And these women as well, they seem to quite enjoy being beneath the burden of things. Interestingly, these three women who were carrying baskets, this same term is in Sanskrit or in Pali is Tripitaka. This is the Pali canon, or the Buddhist canon of traditional teachings of the Buddha, split out into the rules for monastic life, the teachings of the Buddha, and then the philosophical elaborations on the teachings of the Buddha. The Tripitaka literally means 3 baskets. Now, of course, just having some fun here with words, but there's something very interesting at play here. These women probably did not study the Tripitaka, because traditionally women were not allowed to study the Buddhist canon. This was something reserved for men. And yet, they were probably tasked with carrying ordinary baskets, not the 3 baskets of the Buddha's teachings. But might these women have learned something about suffering by carrying ordinary baskets and not the 3 baskets of the Buddha's teachings? Since there's an interesting development that happens in the industrial age. Basically, industrialized populations no longer carry baskets on their heads, but this is a long time practice that probably was common to most, if not all, human societies. It was an efficient way to transport things. But what happens when we stop doing that? And when we forget how to carry a weight on our heads? What comes along with that? From the loss of a physical ability to a mental or an emotional ability. This is something that is not lost to Zen. Consider this. The monk sitting on the left here is practicing, in all likelihood, either anapanasati or vipassana, possibly metta, but most likely he's practicing vipassana or anapanasati. This is a Theravada Buddhist monk. His eyes are closed. But you can also see there's not much attention to the form of the body, not much attention to the posture of the body. Now, I'm not criticizing or saying one meditative practice is better than the other. I'm simply pointing out some nuanced differences here. The person sitting on the right there is practicing Zazen. And you can see the differences. You see the straight spine. You see his shoulders are actually rolled open. The monk on the left, his shoulders are kind of caving in a little bit. It might be hard to see, but his eyes on the right are slightly open. And he's looking at a spot on the floor, maybe 4 to 6 feet in front of him. What's the reason for these differences? In Zen, suffering is a psychophysical phenomenon. That's also somewhat true in traditional Buddhism. Remember, I said what you often realize through vipassana is the mind and the body are not different. All phenomena of the body are mental phenomena and vice versa. You can locate mental phenomena in different parts of the body. Zen, however, attempts to address mental suffering through the body, through bodily or physical practice. Okay. Now this comes out in the instructions for how to sit Zazen. Just because of for the sake of time, we won't actually do this here. But starting in the middle there, you see 3 basic physical instructions. You would draw on the chin, you would maintain a natural spine but an erect spine, and as you're inhaling, you would want the breath to drop into the lower belly. Now, again, anapanasati, vipassana are not hostile towards this. However, they don't emphasize this. There's not explicit instructions given for one to meditate in this way. You don't have these physical cues. In addition to that, and this is very important, there is a kind of body scan happening, but you're not simply scanning sensations. You're scanning for the sensation of gravity. And you're scanning every part of the body to feel the weight of that part of the body. And effectively, it's a relationship that you're feeling between the body and the earth. Now, what you see here is the reason why his posture is so important is because if you're feeling sensation, if your head is jutted out, let's say, you're certainly feeling gravity. However, the problem is that your body is not able to relax, and you will start to develop some holding patterns, some scaric traces, in other words, some habit traces that are lodged in the body from repeated actions. So Zen is trying to undo these samskaric patterns by paying attention to using the sense of gravity as a guide. If you're in the right postural form, then you can sit for very long periods of time, and those holding patterns in the body, which are equally mental patterns, are eventually able to drop away. And what is doing the work of this? It's the pull of gravity itself. So there's, you could say maybe 3 instructions to sitting Zazen. Basic physical cues, sensation, but specifically the sensation of gravity. And the third is breathing. You're breathing into the lower belly, or what is called Hara. This is a term that will come up a few times in the rest of the presentation. Now, in order to understand how this practice is not just addressing physical suffering or physical phenomena, for example, my head jutting forward, one might say, well, that's just simply a physical phenomenon of the physical body. It has nothing to do with the mind or emotions. Tell me, how does this address mental suffering or emotional suffering? In order to address this link, consider some basic connections between some terms in our own English language. All of these terms that are listed there are part of what's called the gravis family. Gravis is a Latin term, and as you can see here, it means heavy or weighty. Gravity, of course, weight or downward acceleration. It's quite easy to see the connection with the next 3 terms with gravity. Gravy is something heavy, like a stew. Grains are often heavy. They settle into small cracks. Gravel, stones, these things are marked by a certain weightiness. But the connection to grief is a little bit more, requires a little bit more thought. Grief derives from gravis by way of the Latin term gravare. Gravare means to weigh down. But not just gravare, also the term aggravare or aggravare, or in English, aggravation, something like anger. Gravare is grief, you could say, and aggravare is aggravation. Something gets added on to the grief. And so the grief, which already was heavy, becomes even heavier. And in English, we have terms that describe the experience of this in the body. We could say someone suffers an unfortunate situation, they have a grievance, and then they start to get a little hot-headed. Heat rises, right? Their face turns red. Maybe their shoulders become tense. Maybe their fists start to clench. Grief, though, would appear to occur a little bit lower in the body, maybe in the heart region. Right? So oftentimes, of course, emotions register here in the chest. But the language gives us some important clues. It would appear that aggravation is something added on to the grief. And then that which adds on to the grief causes the grief to rise. It actually prevents the dropping or the sinking. Now, the question is this the natural movement of grief? If it's left to its own, if it's left to itself, does grief elevate in the body? Now, we've already said grief tends to register more in the chest than in even higher regions of the body, such as aggravation. But it might even be the case that grief occurs even lower. So how far down does grief register? I would argue that grief actually first manifests in the belly. Someone experiences an unfortunate situation, a significant loss, and they might report, my stomach was tied up in knots. I feel sick to my stomach, for example. But we often forget this, or we disregard this sensation. We don't pay attention to this sensation, and we locate it exclusively in the heart region. And then we surround this grief with a fortress of aggravation. The shoulders, the fists, the arms come out, the face becomes red. Now, as we said earlier, Buddhism widely recognizes that we can't eliminate the grief. And so it focuses its attention not on the grief, it focuses your attention on distinguishing between the grief and what occurs afterwards. Or you could say that which gets added on to the grief. So in many ways, this difference between grief and aggravation maps onto Buddhist psychology of craving. Craving is that which gets added onto the initial suffering, the initial grievous sensation. And Buddhist meditation is trying to get you to recognize this distinction and then to let go of the craving. Now, I'm just trying to keep an eye to the time. What time are we finishing?
Soon.
So we're finishing soon. Okay, so I'm just gonna make a couple final comments here. And one is this. Through Zen training, the goal is to attune your body to the experience of gravity. And something interesting happens is you attune your body to the sensation, not just of gravity, but to the sensation of sinking. Now, a contemporary Zen teacher, he describes the experience of grief in a different way, or maybe differently than most people would. As you can see here, he says, I was with my mother when she died. I can still feel the sensations of just sitting silently at her bedside for the 30 minutes before my sister arrived in the room. I felt drained of all thoughts. Every part of me sagged. Every part of me sagged, felt pulled toward the floor. Draining and sagging are gravity at work. Gravity and grief as one. Now you can experience this through Vipassana, but Zen is specifically attuning your sensation, your awareness to the sensation of gravity. And this incidentally actually prepares one to experience the sensation of grief in a particular way. Green will later elaborate a little bit more on how his own Zen training fostered particular ability to simply feel the sensation of grief without trying to fix it. He says, in order for that dropping of grief to happen, numerous muscles throughout the body need to wake up and to relax. For muscle tissue to wake up, it needs to feel the pull of gravity. The process of feeling the work of gravity throughout the body takes a great deal of time because of the ways in which we identify with our habits. For the most part, we are not aware that the ways we hold our body in the gravitational field are based on neuromuscular habit. This means that literally, we don't feel gravity in the majority of the muscles in our bodies. At least, we don't feel that gravity till we are struck by grief or we train intensely in Zen. In many ways, what he offers here is something that fits perfectly with traditional Buddhist psychology, as I've already been explaining. In distinguishing the difference between a sensation and then the felt need to react to a sensation, one then develops the ability simply to sit with the sensation, including the sensation of grief. But one thing that distinguishes the Zen practice is that you're training not just your awareness, but you are training your physical body to discipline the mind with the ability not just to sit with grief, but to expedite the process effectively of grieving, because the grief will drop more readily, more quickly, and more clearly through the body and into the Hara. I could say much more about this, but maybe this is a good place to stop. And if there's more questions about anything else that was to come, I can also speak to that. All right, thanks. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much for that. One of the topics that I came and was eager to hear you speak about was the connection to Tao.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I think you either said outright or alluded to kind of a central channel type of topic. And I was hoping you could say a few words on that.
Okay, yeah, great. Thanks for asking. I would have loved to speak more about this, but as you can see, I got a little distracted by some tangents. But as I mentioned at the beginning, and as you pointed out here, as this Zen Buddhist tradition develops in China, it's not just Buddhism anymore. In many ways, it's equally Taoism. So Zen, as I understand it, is a blend of Buddhism and Taoism. And one really important insight that Taoism brings and contributes to Buddhist practice is many of these insights into the experience of weight, whether that weight is understood in terms of gravity or it's an experience of grief. And all of you, I'm guessing, have seen the yin yang symbol. And the dark half of that symbol is the yin. And yin symbolizes heaviness, weightiness. It symbolizes the feminine. It also symbolizes darkness, hence why it's the dark half. It's the black color of that half of that symbol. The other half, of course, is light. Light in the sense of lightweight, but also light as illumination. And there is a small circle in each of those halves. The dark half has a small circle of yin, or the white, and the white half has a dark circle, which symbolizes, of course, yin, the heaviness and the dark. Now, what that means is you can actually penetrate into an experience of yang, which is the light, by penetrating deeply into yin. That is, if you take heaviness to an extreme, or you take darkness to extreme, you will actually penetrate to the heart of lightness. For example, someone who exercises regularly and really gets out of their system their excess energy, their yang. Okay, yang is kind of a rising, growing, kind of outward moving energy. Yin is sinking and inward moving. So if you get that yang energy out of your system to the fullest extent, you will sleep very well. Sleep is yin. Sleep is sinking. And of course, we sleep best at night. So our own human movements are very closely tied to the natural environment. And coming more fully to your question then, you don't find this rich interplay of opposites or polarities in traditional Buddhist meditation. But Zen is using this interplay of polarities, and it's an energetic interplay. It's not a contemplative practice. It's really an energy practice where you're exploring the experience of weightiness to its fullest extreme. And we didn't talk about the exhalation, but there's a particular exhalation practice in Zazen where the gross physical body continues to drop off. And the gross physical body, meaning the body that bears our samskaric traces, our habit traces, that starts to melt away from the pull of gravity. But then what rises naturally, it's not something you will, it just naturally happens. This energy accumulates in the lower belly and it starts to rise up this channel. It's very similar to the Shakti in many yogic practices, but it's formulated more in a Taoist frame. So it's really taking yin to the extreme allows the yang to naturally rise, and it rises up through the spine, through the crown of the head. Yes.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I found it very interesting. And in a class today, should I project my? We were reading Shunryu Suzuki's Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, and there's a section in that really fascinating book about the mind waves, and the discussion of the waves as being non-separate from the nature of water itself, and the suggestion that perhaps the distractions in your mind is inseparable from our original mind. So I think that maybe has some resonances with how you're kind of thinking about grief in the Zen tradition. And then I was also thinking about Dogen, the 13th century Zen master who started social issue. He's I think a really interesting figure because he's making a lot of innovations of Chan Buddhism. And one of the really interesting things that he does is he takes the term Shinjin Datsuraku, which is Shinjin is the dusts of the mind, Datsuraku is to drop. And then he basically reinterprets that as Shinjin Datsuraku, which is the same sound, but means mind and body, the dropping of mind and body. So I think that's one of the really interesting innovations that he makes in saying that that we don't just drop the mind, but we also drop the body as well. And I was wondering, you pointed to a number of differences between the Theravada, the Vipassana, and the Zen tradition. And I think maybe a third distinction is the Buddha nature, right? And the idea that if we're able to drop everything, including the mind and the body, then the Buddha nature can naturally manifest itself. So I was wondering if you could maybe also touch on the idea of Buddha nature in the Zen context, and then also in relationship with this notion of grief and how we kind of think about grief as a part of our Buddha nature too.
Yeah, well, that's such a great insight into some of the teachings of Dogen, and the question is fantastic. First of all, before I answer that, I should check in with the boss. How much time do we have here remaining?
I think we were a little over, but I think we can.
It's fine.
We're fine, we're here. Go for it.
Okay, so first of all, I think the way that you are interpreting Dogen, at least the way I read Dogen, I would fully agree with you. One thing I would point out though is my understanding of Dogen is that he doesn't emphasize so much Hara and Hara breathing, this particular lower belly breathing, and in particular, which we didn't get to, is this exhalation. And the exhalation is important because one is not simply learning how to sink. One's not just developing a sensitivity to gravity, a really refined sensitivity to gravity or to grief, and just simply allowing that to happen. And as you point out, very much so as a natural process. Grief is natural. In many ways, it's just a manifestation of a natural process of sinking. It's a process, it's an experience of loss. Right? So nothing unnatural about that. But we don't just become a wet noodle, or like there is this melting away, but you don't just melt like ice cream and then your body just kind of just falls to the floor in a puddle. In many ways, that would not affirm the Buddha nature. And again, coming back to the Taoist frame, when one is exploring this experience of weightiness, one is doing so with a view to exploring the relationship of weightiness to lightness, of heaviness to levity, and of darkness to illumination. Interestingly, even the term nirvana is often translated as enlightenment. This was the Buddha's enlightenment, but the term nirvana actually means blowing out. So it actually entails darkenment. It's a darkening. But through the darkening, one then has this experience of a liberating enlightenment. So I think in the Zen tradition and Buddha nature, it's tying Buddhist ideals and Buddhist values to natural processes, where the two are effectively identical. A Buddha is simply one who awakens to their true nature, which is nature itself working through you in terms of this interplay of light and dark, heaviness and lightness. But that doesn't just happen, that realization, of course, doesn't happen on its own. One has to realize this through their own efforts. And so this form of Zazen is a kind of laboratory for experimenting with these energies of heaviness and lightness. And so we really need these really clear and explicit instructions for how to sit physically with the body, the posture, such that the weight can sink, what you're sensing specifically, you're sensing the feeling of weight. And then what happens independent of your will, you're simply willing to let go. And then what happens naturally is this rising affirmation of life, This vital energy is what's rising up through the spine. And I think Dogen would not disagree with that, but he doesn't explicitly, as I read Dogen, I don't think he explicitly captures that really rich interplay that ultimately is not just a mere affirmation of heaviness. It's the affirmation of life that comes up naturally from taking heaviness to the extreme. Yeah.
You did that great etymology with the gravity, grief. And the Sanskrit, of course, is guru.
It's thinking the same.
Yeah, which is heavy.
Uh-huh.
And guru is the one who enters with the gravitas.
Yeah.
That then stirs up.
Yeah.
And allows that process that you so beautifully described to unfold.
Yes, interestingly, guru as a teacher and guru as heaviness, that's precisely what's happening here. The sensation of heaviness is the guide through this process of endarkenment. As you're sitting there, right, and you're kind of feeling into how am I supposed to sit? You're supposed to sit in such a way that the weight, the heaviness will drop right through you.
Mm.
So that's the teacher, is the sensation of heaviness itself. And of course, you know, as a good Zen guru will say, I'm not your teacher. You know, through, for example, the Sanzen or the koan training, they will say, no, you need to go sit and realize your own teacher is that experience of heaviness that only you can experience in your body. Yes.
How similar is the Hara breathing to abdominal breathing? Because I mean, from the health science, we've learned that that's also very good for mental health and relaxation, obviously.
Okay, wonderful question. So if they're very similar with respect to the inhalation, right? It's not thoracic breathing, right? It's belly breathing and it's deep belly breathing as inhalation. However, the exhalation is really what's key because it's the exhalation that transforms the heaviness into the lightness. So for example, here's the difference. If you take your three fingers and you put them just 2 inches below your belly button and just cough. And you feel, what do you feel there?
A tightening of the belly.
Yeah, the belly expands out, right? It juts out. And if you were to like get even lower, well, I won't do it because it might not be appropriate, but you get even lower, the bottom of the pelvic floor, it actually juts down. The force of the cough juts down and out. Now, imagine if you could exhale like a very slow, controlled cough. A little slower. That's good. I appreciate you trying that.
I'll work on it for next time.
For example, when you're blowing a balloon, there's a pressure against your lips and the air. Now, if you just let that pressure drop into the lower belly, and let's say you felt the pressure, kind of the energy kind of going down into the knees, let your knees widen out a little bit. This is a form of exhalation that is actually, you have to learn this. It's not natural in the sense of like babies don't do this. Babies inhale belly-wise, but they don't exhale into the belly. Even in yoga, you know, many of the yogic exhalation practices, the belly is going in. But here, the belly is going down. Energetically, you're sending the exhalation into the pelvic floor, much like a cough. But you're doing it in a slow, steady way. And what starts to happen is it quickens the process of the holding patterns in the upper body. It quickens that process of dissolving and melting away. And the central channel now becomes very firmly rooted in the pelvic floor. and it has a much more strong base to rise up the Sushumna, as you would say in yogic terminology. Yes.
I wanted to ask about, so like belly breathing, but like Dantian breath, it doesn't go up past, it stays low, but it's still like the in instead of down. Is that what the difference is in these breaths, where they both are still in the lower part of our chest?
That's right. That's right. It's very, Hara breathing, in all likelihood, is coming from Dantian practice.
Okay, that's like below the belly.
Yeah, below the belly button. Yeah, so actually, when you breathe this way, this is very soft, but this is, it feels, it's very firm, but it's soft and supple at the same time. And I think the closest parallel in terms of a form of breathing is Dantian breathing. But there's certain practices that develop the same kind of breathing, like opera singers. They learn this kind of breathing because when you're singing, you need to ground yourself firmly, right? It's very difficult to sing if you're like, acrobats who are on like ropes and stuff. They're really at a disadvantage. It's hard to root yourself because you're up in the air. So if you're here, you're really grounded. And when you're exhaling with the exhalation of a vocalized exhalation, at the same time, you're rooting yourself in the ground. So there are certain practices that you have to train yourself to exhale in this way. Dantian is one, and there's some small circles of communities who train in this way, even in Western civilization, but it's not widely practiced. Mhm.
I have some amazing news. It just flashed in. And I got a text from our department chair in theological studies. And it says, Jeopardy tonight, the blue square, Loyola Marymount University offered the USA's first of these degrees. Yoga studies.
You're telling me I could get a degree in yoga studies?
Hit the peak time.
Finally made it.
It's a master's.
He's been on Jeopardy.
Thank everybody.
Yes, most of us here.
Thank you to Professor Ashton for kicking off our lecture series. It was brilliant talk. I would like to hear the rest of it. And thank you to everybody here and everybody out there. Got another one coming up in a few weeks.
With Dr. Jane.
Yes, with Dr. Jane. Thank you. So we'll come back and join us again. Thank you again to your brilliant talk.
Thanks for having me.